Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar about our Smart IP series. My name is Marcel. I'm from Germany. You might realize this from my slight accent in my English. And I'm your host today. And we like to guide you through all of the possibilities of our Smart IP series. So what makes this range of loudspeakers and technology really special? What makes it easy for you to use it in installations? What are the technical details? For example, what network architecture is needed or what switches are needed. So a lot of technical stuff, but we'll also talk about the acoustical advantages of these speakers. And of course, you should also take part. So please ask your questions, just type them in, and we'll have a really, depending on your questions, long Q&A section in the end, so we can answer all of your questions. So please feel free to type in your questions all the time and they will be collected. With me in the virtual studio from Sweden is Fredrik, still a new colleague. Fredrik just joined us recently and has a special focus on AV installation because, Fredrik, this is, I think, your main background.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I've been with Genelec since December, and I'm focusing on AV in Sweden, taking care and helping customers with system design. And been here for 6 months and enjoying it a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, great to have you with me today because it's always, really useful. Some of you might know my background is more from the studio side. And it's always really good to have someone, with real-world experience in the AV field. So Fredrik will, for example, cover the complete section on APIs and how to control our speaker setups. Yeah, and then I think let's just start our presentation. Yeah, our main claim, you might read it, is power to the speaker, power to the installer. This is not only a nice claim. This is somehow the truth because we want to somehow make it possible for you that you can be powerful as an installer, but we also somehow have a special feature in this series regarding the power because in the end, we are using one cable for power, audio, and controlling the speaker. For those of you who don't know us in detail, we are a loudspeaker manufacturer from Finland. And of course, our roots are in the professional range of loudspeakers. And we are doing this since 1978. So we'll have the 45th anniversary next year. And the Genelec factory is located in the middle of Finland, close to a lake in the small city called Iisalmi. So double I, a lot of letters are used doubled in Finnish. And I think this is one of the most important things to know, that we produce all of our speakers in Finland. So we ensure a really high build quality. We have good quality control in the end. And we are also really focusing on sustainability. And not only since this has become really popular, this was one of the key values of Genelec right from the start. So for example, we are using recycled aluminium. And as you can see on the image, of course, solar power and the best option in Finland, of course, power from the water. So sustainability is one of our key values. And we also try to ensure that our speakers somehow are really flexible and don't consume any power. Yeah, this is wrong. They do consume some power, but we try to make sure that is as less as possible, especially for features like an automated switch off mode or, for example, a low energy idle mode. If we would not need any energy, I think, this would be a really, really nice breakthrough. As I told you in the beginning, the Smart IP series is focusing on audio over IP. So it's Dante and AES67. And we also have PoE. So we feed the power to the speaker using a cable, a single network cable. And this cable is also used to control and to configure the speakers. I would like to start with a short introduction on the acoustical design. So first of all, we are using exactly the same acoustical design for our installation speakers than we do for our professional speakers for studio use. So there is no compromise regarding audio quality. So if you're familiar with other speakers for installation, you will hopefully realize that we really offer high-end audio quality. And yeah, as I told you, it's the same quality that you can find on professional studios. The enclosures are made of die-cast aluminum, so it's not plastic. This is a very stiff material, which makes it possible to avoid resonances. And the other advantage is that we can keep the thickness of the somehow walls of this enclosure really thin. The consequence of this is that we have a larger volume, so an interior volume of the speaker, and this directly makes it possible that you somehow get lower bass. So even our smallest speakers, for example, play down to approximately 65 hertz. So you can use them in full range. And especially for background music, you'll get a really rich, warm sound. And yeah, for example, you can keep the levels quite low, which of course is also an advantage of active designs. And you still feel the full range feeling. Yeah. The rounded edges we use are not only for design. The main reason for that is that we avoid edge diffraction, which makes the frequency response worse. Also, always you can see around the tweeter, this range is called waveguide. And this waveguide is used to ensure that the frequency response is not only linear and neutral on axis, but also off axis, so to the sides. And I think this is especially interesting for installations because usually people don't sit in the sweet spot. They move, and of course you also want to cover a larger range of your room using not that many speakers. And this is the advantage of this waveguide. So as you can see on the right side, we are really flat and linear on axis, but it's really well controlled if we, for example, are 60 degrees out of this. And the image here is also something we use in studios quite a lot. So somehow the wider the corridor of this green field is, the better and is the off-axis performance. And what you can also read from these diagrams is that a speaker of a certain size, for example, this is the 4420, always gets omnidirectional. In this case, for example, starting at 500 hertz. This is always, really important to keep in mind, because that means that low frequency energy is somehow everywhere in the room, and therefore acoustical treatment can make sense. And of course, you should somehow compensate if a speaker is located close to the wall. Fredrik will talk about this later, because this is why we use filters. Because of this waveguide, also the listening zone is quite wide. So the radiation is approximately 120 degrees horizontally and 100 degrees vertically. With the newest model, the 4410, it's even a little wider. This one reaches 130 horizontally and 110 vertically. So compared to other speakers, you can use less speakers and still cover a huge range of your room with really good audio quality. And because I mentioned it, this is something, of course, which is really important in the studio business, but is also really important in installations. So if you have any chance, for example, to be involved in the planning or to talk to the architects, always, suggest to add some acoustical treatment, because this can be of huge help, especially for the time domain. So the reverberance of a room gets lower, and this makes it easier to communicate. In restaurants, you can spend hours, chatting with each other, and yeah, it's simply way easier to understand each other because you don't get that many uncontrolled reflections from everywhere. And architects usually, love glass and nice surfaces, but usually these surfaces reflect audio perfectly, which is not helpful for understanding things. And also, for example, the level of background music can be lower and is well more controlled if you have some acoustical treatment. And there are a lot of options today. Of course, the well-known ceiling absorbers. You can also place something like that. So also acoustical absorbing materials, for example, below the desks, so you don't see them. But this also helps. And then, for example, what is a really nice option, that you can have photos or pictures which are somehow printed on an absorbing material. So they look like images on the wall, but they are absorbers. And of course, all of these techniques can also be used in offices, for example, and especially meeting rooms. So all of us know during the pandemic, a lot of online meetings became popular. And even in these rooms, it can be of huge help, especially if there are more people sitting around a desk and not only one guy talking into a microphone, to have acoustical treatment. So please always ensure this is the best basis to start with. I would now like to show you the 3 models from the Smart IP series we have available at the moment, starting with the smallest one. This is also the newest member of the family. This is the 4410. So some of you might be familiar with our somehow naming of the speakers. I won't go into the detail, but for example, this 10 simply means this is a 3-inch speaker. And as I've talked about before, we reach 67 hertz as -6 dB point, even with this really small speaker. So for example, this is a really good option for having these speakers, for example, close to a TV to simply make sure that the sound of the TV is way better than with internal speakers. The weight is quite low. And still we have good amplifier power. We're always using Class D because they are really efficient. And they also don't emit too much warmth to the environment, which sometimes can also be really helpful. Yeah, all of us know a lot of people sitting in a room, and if then you get heat from the speakers, this is not needed, and we try to avoid it. The next size is the 4420. 20 size always means it's a 4-inch bass driver. Of course, you get slightly higher SPL, and because of the larger size, we also can play lower. So you can see the speaker already reaches 55 hertz. Still, not that heavy, 3 kilograms. And a really good option, for example, if you are sitting a little further away. So the only somehow disadvantage of the 4410 is that, of course, if you have a large listening distance, the sound is not that precise anymore compared to the larger models. So for example, if you're sitting 3, 4, 5 meters away from a TV, then it would make sense to go for one of the larger models. And the largest one we have at the moment is the 4430, which is a 5-inch driver. You can reach 104 dBs, and 45 hertz is the low bass -6 dB point. If we look at the backside of these speakers, as I said in the beginning, the main thing is one single RJ45 connector, which carries the audio, the power over Ethernet, and of course the control functions. For the 2 larger models, so the 4430 and the 4420, we also included a Phoenix connector for analog input. This is the standard connector, for example, we use with our analog speakers. So for example, the 4010, so the 4010, 4020, 4030, these analog models offer this analog input. And yeah, this can be used, for example, as a backup, and you can switch between. What's also, I think, highly important, talking about architecture, that sometimes it's really good to have a speaker in the best audio quality, but you don't want to see it. Therefore, we offer the 2 larger models, 4420 and 30, in 120 RAL options. So you can freely choose the color you will need, for example, matching the interior. And we also have available the raw option, which simply means aluminium without any, additional coloring. And these are 2 examples how you can use RAL options. As you can see on the left side, it perfectly matches the background. on the right side, it matches the interior design of this. I think it's a bar in Sweden. Yes, and I will hand over to Fredrik, talking about mounting options. And Fredrik, I think this is also of huge interest regarding installation.
Yeah, normally you need to have flexible mounting options because you never know where you can mount your speakers, and so we offer a wide range of accessories for the Smart IP speakers. It could be worth mentioning as well that the accessories for the 4400 series is the same as the 4000 series. So if you have a wall mount for a 4010, for example, you can use that for a 4410 as well. So yeah, we have everything from fixed wall brackets to ball joint wall mounts. We have ceiling mounts, truss mounts, floor stands. We have desktop stands. So yeah, we think we can cover most installation options actually with the accessories. And
sometimes for museums, for example, it can also be an option. We have a threaded hole also on the bottom of the speakers, so you can use, for example, a standard microphone stand to attach them directly to it.
Yes, exactly, like the one I have on like we both have in our backgrounds actually.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you visit our website, you can check out all the accessories. We have a really good catalog covering each model and the options for each model. So yeah, please visit the website and check out all the accessories we have for the speakers.
Now we are talking about controlling the speakers and setting them up.
Yes, the software to control it all, the Smart IP Manager. We use that for discovery of the speakers. We have the power management done in this software, network management, input selection, discovery and organization, as I mentioned before. So on the left-hand side, it's a little bit hard to see on this screen, but this is where you see all the loudspeakers. That's where they pop up when you open the software. Then you add your zones, for example, a restaurant, bar, lobby, and corridor. And you can use for each loudspeaker and zone, you have the acoustic profiles available, which is for each loudspeaker, you have 5 acoustic profiles that you can recall, including input selection, filters, levels, and in regards to the filters, we have 20 filters available with everything from high pass, low pass. We have high shelve, low shelving filters, and we also have parametric filters. So we can use all these 20 filters to calibrate each loudspeaker perfectly for the environment. Hopefully you don't need to use all the 20 filters because then you might need to talk to the architect regarding some acoustical treatment of the room. But if that's not possible, then you can tweak every loudspeaker individually as much as you want, basically.
And I think, do you know, this high amount of filters also simply comes from our professional range, because indeed it's the same amount of filters we use for our SAM models. And just to give you a short summary, what you could use, for example, in installations, usually if a speaker, for example, is in the corner, then it makes sense to reduce the bass, simply because the bass adds to the direct signal and it can sound a little boomy. Or, for example, you cannot understand dialogue easy. What also can be compensated, for example, are desktop reflections. So, for example, if it's placed in an office, because this usually adds something at approximately 150 to 200 hertz, and also can make it harder to understand spoken word. And of course, you can always fine tune, as it's shown here in the example, the high frequencies. If you have the impression, let's have this a little smoother, just lower the high frequencies.
Yes, and you can also, if you, for example, install the speakers in a dividable room, you can load one preset for the combined room and one preset for the separate rooms, because usually the acoustical characteristics of the room might vary a little bit when you add another wall to it. So that's a really usable example for the acoustical profiles. Yeah, and also worth mentioning is that you handle all the firmware updating and everything in Smart IP Manager as well. So yeah, it's basically the only software you need to commission this system, which leads us to this slide. Who is using the Smart IP Manager? And yeah, it's a tool for the installing engineer. It's intended for the engineer who is deploying the installation, and the end user is not intended to use this. We have other options for that with graphical user interfaces using API commands. So that's really this is the installing engineer tool that shouldn't be accessible for the end user. Yeah, so we can go on to the next. Yeah, the system organization. That's the one. As I mentioned before, you discovered the loudspeakers with Smart IP Manager, and then you add zones to the system, and then you add loudspeakers to that zone. And you can set up different profiles for each zone. You can set up different output levels. You can set up different input settings for each zone. So you basically have a very flexible system to be able to control all your Smart IP loudspeakers and acoustically calibrating them for the room that they are sitting in.
What we should say, Fredrik, or I should add, usually it starts with a profile 0, and you cannot save anything to this profile. This is somehow the factory preset profile. So always make sure that if you are done with your settings, write it to one of the other profiles. Otherwise, you will realize, or you would think it's not saved. And another thing we have to say, of course, although it looks like a Mac on the left side at the moment, the Smart IP Manager at the moment is only available for PC. And someone asked me yesterday, for example, is it possible? I was using a laptop for, configuring the system, and now one of my colleagues wants to change something. So, for example, do we have to save a preset or some export of the data from the original laptop used? This is not needed because the moment you connect your laptop to the network and the moment you open Smart IP Manager, it will always read out the settings that are stored to the speakers. So you don't have to somehow save this as an external preset.
That's correct. And then when you have set up your speakers, then you go on to the audio channel assignment. And I think this screenshot is something that many of you know. This is the Ordinate Dante controller, and this is where all the routing is actually done. So you have your audio transmitters on the top there, and you have the audio receivers on the left. So you check the boxes to which stream is going to which loudspeaker. In Dante controller, you also do your multicast management. So many times you have many loudspeakers that actually need the same stream. So then you convert it to a multicast stream and then route it to the correct loudspeaker. We also manage the AES67 in here. You activate that on each loudspeaker that needs a AES67 multicast streams. You also do the naming of the loudspeaker, the Dante naming. So you have a little bit simpler name for example, bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, and so on. So you don't use a serial number anymore, or you just give them a name that is a little bit more intuitive. Also, you can handle ST2110-30 streams. It's not that common in installations, but it's SMPTE standard for streaming audio. But to do that, you need to have Dante Domain Manager. And it's worth mentioning that all our loudspeakers are Dante Domain Manager compatible. So we can use Domain Manager for added security and added user administration for access and non-access to the Dante network.
Now let's see, somehow how the end user can control this stuff, because of course we don't want them to use all of this somehow complicated stuff like Smart IP Manager or the Dante controller.
No, exactly. So we provide the installer with a public API for the Smart IP speakers. It's using a simple REST style communication with response messages back from the loudspeaker in a very readable JSON format. So it's very simple to learn. It's very simple to add to a user interface. And what you can do there is you can manage and you can monitor the output level. You can monitor and manage the mute. You can load the 5 acoustic profiles that we mentioned earlier with input selections and filter settings and everything. And you can also manage and monitor the power status of all the loudspeakers in the system. So it's a very flexible but simple interface to do your own settings and controls.
And quite new, we have another option to make it even more easy to control the really basic functions, and this is the Smart IP controller app.
Yeah, that's for a very basic, not so very complex installation. We have our own app available from the App Store for iOS and iPadOS, and from Google Play for the Android devices. The end user is using their own mobile phone or an iPad or whatever to control the different zones. Worth mentioning is that you as an installer is controlling what zone to be accessible from each user. So for example, if you have a hotel with a lobby and a bar and a restaurant and corridors, you can have one user controlling only the restaurant. You can have another user controlling the lobby and the restaurant. And you can have the bar on a separate controller. And you can leave the corridors uncontrollable. So you can just set the levels and everything in the corridors and not letting the end user control that at all, because that should always be on the same audio level. So it's very flexible, and you can control unlimited number of zones with this app. And as mentioned before, you control the power, you control volume, and you control the mute. And you can also set a master control for the whole system. And as you see on the picture on the iPad, there you have the master control on the top, and that's something that you as the installer can make accessible or non-accessible for the user to use. So there you have a master mute and the master power on and off. So yeah, it's a very simple but flexible way of controlling our Smart IP system in for example, a retail store or a hotel with the same background music everywhere. So yeah, it's a very, very simple way of controlling the loudspeakers.
Or also, for example, for a small installation where simply they don't have a house automation system.
Yes.
And for the house automation systems,
yeah,
we have third-party control options.
Yes, we do. Right now, we have integrations with AMX, and that's actually a driver that we released just a couple of days ago, which you can see here on the right. That's actually a very flexible driver where you can load the acoustic profiles, you can monitor everything on the loudspeaker, you can raise and lower levels on each loudspeaker and so on. So that's a very new and very nice alternative for all AMX users out there. Then also we have a driver for Control 4. I think that was the first one we released. Then we also have drivers for Crestron, and a couple of months ago we also released a plugin for the QSC QSYS platform. In all these drivers and plugins, we have control and monitoring of power, mute, and level of the loudspeakers. And the monitoring part is really interesting in if you have, for example, a Crestron Fusion server or a QSys Reflect Enterprise Manager, you can monitor the loudspeakers in a very simple way, and you can get messages via email if something is down, for example. And you just in QSys Reflect, you ping the loudspeaker, and if the loudspeaker doesn't respond back, you get a message on an administrator level that something is wrong, and you can actually check that fairly quickly. So yeah, it's a lot of flexibility with these drivers to control the loudspeakers from a third-party system.
What of course is great from our point of view is that we realize, that more and more of these larger manufacturers of house automation systems, they know about Smart IP, and they know about, the flexibility. And of course, we are really happy that they integrate it in an easy to understand and easy to use way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fredrik, for this overview about, all of the controlling options. My part is now a little more technical, but of course, this also has to be covered. As I told you in the beginning, we use absolutely a standard CAT cable for somehow everything. So we provide the power, PoE plus or PoE. The management, as Fredrik already showed to you, mainly this means Smart IP Manager, but of course also all of the API and other controller options are used and are sent over this cable. Streaming, also as mentioned, I want just to add, for example, this ST211030. This is something, for example, which is used in broadcast. Yeah. So this also can be a good option for a small setups, to, for example, just to listen to a stream, which is broadcasted, and then you can also use these formats. I think most commonly will be used Dante for installations, and of course the AS67 options. And I also mentioned this, we have an analog line-in connector using the Euroblock or the Phoenix connector on the models 20 and 30. Yeah, regarding the cable length, of course, I think all of you know with longer cable length, the power is reduced, but still it's possible to use 100 meter of cable length. So this should be enough for most of installations. It's always recommended, of course, to keep the cable length as short as possible. And of course, you can also use some PoE switches closer to the speaker to ensure that you somehow have the full PoE power at each speaker. Just for clarity, with a nice illustration on the right side, it's not waterproof. So it's for indoor use only. Although you might enjoy the quality outside as well, it could be a limited enjoyment, limited by, the time, and when somehow the humidity hits the speaker, this is simply not intended. And also important, it's not a studio monitoring system, simply because of some compromises we have to make regarding the PoE and PoE plus power. Some of the Smart IP is absolutely solution that includes everything. So we have the power amplification because it's an active speaker design. Always think about this if it comes to pricing. So if you compare it to other installation options, you should always be aware of, hey, the amplification is already included. We have the equalizers, which are really flexible and help you to ensure that you still have really good audio quality, even in challenging rooms. And especially, if the mounting options are somehow a compromise, for example, in corners. Yeah. You can adjust the level, you can adjust delays. So you can always also make sure something like, for example, time of flight compensation from speakers that are at a different position in the room. We can use the presets for somehow having everything available just, by the click of a button, or for example, by using the house automation system. You can always monitor the status. And of course, you can stream audio to it. Just a word about the PoE and PoE Plus. What's important to know that you always should take special care of the somehow power budget of a PoE switch, because some of these devices have, let's say, 240 watts in total, but then they have way more ports. So they somehow use this overall 240 watts budget for a lot of ports, which may result in that each port is not able to give you the complete full power all the time, which of course is not recommended if you are using a PoE powered speaker. So always make sure that each port can output the full power at any time. And yeah, of course, there's also the option, I don't have this on a slide, but you can also use power injectors. So these are small devices that are simply connected to a power socket, and then they feed in PoE to the speaker. But usually we exactly want to avoid that. The installation should be as easy as possible, and therefore, usually, of course, it's the better option to use the standard CAT cable to provide PoE and to feed it to the speaker. And of course, I think this is also worth mentioning. You need a cable for each speaker. And of course, it's not a daisy chain. Otherwise, once again, we would not follow the physics anymore. You should use, if you ask me, you should always use PoE Plus switches, simply because this offers you higher amount of power, usually approximately 30 watts, while PoE without the plus is only 15 watts. But it's still the case that, of course, our speakers can work with both formats. So you can use PoE and PoE plus. You might remember from the beginning that, for example, some of our speakers are using 50 watts amps. So you might ask yourself, how is this possible if even PoE plus is only offering us 30 watts? Somehow we use a kind of buffer device. So we feed the energy to this buffer device, and then it's possible for us to provide peaks as well. So for a really short time, for example, we have a higher amount of power needed, and this then can be somehow fed out of the buffering device. And the good thing is that usually, if it's not a loudness war mastering, there are dynamics in audio. So especially, for example, in spoken word, but also music has peaks, and then the audio level is reduced, and we can simply make use of this. And somehow the only thing, or the only compromise we have to make is that we can ensure that we reach the maximum SPL all the time. So this is exactly the same SPL we would reach with our models having the standard power supply. But of course, the time is limited. So for example, if you have a really high volume for a longer time, then you might reach somehow the end of the PoE capabilities, and the volume will simply be reduced slightly. But of course, this will happen automatically. And of course, we also make always sure that the speaker is not damaged. So we have protection circuits in all of our speakers. Yeah, and once again, of course, you will simply be able to have higher volumes for a longer time if you're using PoE plus. So for example, if it's an installation that is not only for somehow the typical low-level background music, let's say it's at a bar, and you want to also have slightly higher volumes for the later moments of the evening, then you should always go for PoE plus. Yeah, if it comes to subwoofers, especially, you might know that this is really challenging because you need more power. If you want to use somehow classical devices, you can always use Dante AVIO adapters. So these are available, and you can find all kind of adapters. Adapter which is really useful for some applications is, for example, the Bluetooth adapter, because this makes it possible that you can stream audio from your smartphone, for example, or from your tablet directly to your Dante network. So you simply connect this AVIO adapter to your network, and then you will see the Bluetooth adapter, connect to it using your smartphone or tablet, and then you can stream audio to it. Other options, for example, would be AS-EBU, so also one of the professional standards. So this is also possible. If you want to use a standard Mac or PC, the best option is the Dante Virtual Sound Card, because this is really inexpensive and offers you a simple Dante connectivity using the standard network port from your computer. And you can define different layouts, so also covering different channel counts. And yeah, this is the perfect way to simply stream audio from your computer to the Dante network. A little more advanced is the Dante VR option, because this option offers you the chance that you can route multi-channel options, simply choosing the applications. As you can see in this screenshot, for example, we have GarageBand, or we have Safari playing some YouTube stuff, for example. We have Skype, and we can route everything and all of these signals in a flexible way to our Dante network. So you see, a single PC or a single Mac can be perfectly fine to stream audio to your speakers.
Yes.
Yeah, and then a question once more for you, Fredrik, because a lot of installers are always asking us, what IP switches do we recommend and why?
Yeah, we don't really recommend any certain brands, and for smaller systems there are not very high recommendations. It's as long as you're not on the Ordinate blacklist, which that blacklist is normally due to energy efficient Ethernet. That's not being able, you're not being able to switch it off. Then the switch won't be able to work in a Dante environment. So for smaller systems, there are not very high recommendations or demands. But if you go for a larger system, then of course you should use gigabit switches, and also you have to be able to use quality of service and IGMP multicast control over the streams, especially if you're using our speakers together with a video system of some video over IP system of some kind. Then it's very important to have a switch that is capable of multicast filtering and quality of service. Otherwise, you will run into problems fairly quickly, actually. Yeah, and then also you should, as Marcel mentioned, you should take the PoE budget into consideration, and you should also check that how many of the ports on the switch are actually PoE capable, because it might be that you have a 20-port switch, but only 12 ports are PoE enabled. So then you can only add 12 speakers to that switch. So those are some of the recommendations for the switches. But as I said, we're not really recommending any particular brands, but follow the Ordinate recommendations, and yeah, then you should be good to go. Absolutely.
What sometimes also should be taken in consideration, for example, are fans. So for example, if it's an installation where the switch is, for example, really mounted in the same room and you can clearly hear it, for example, in museums or stuff like that, just make sure there are switches available that don't use fans. They use passive cooling. And of course, this then can be the better option. And as you mentioned, Fredrik, for example, sometimes it's better to have a higher amount of smaller switches compared to a really large one. Because, for example, it doesn't get that hot if it's a smaller switch, and you can get a better PoE budget also from a smaller switch. So this can be really useful. And once again, for example, it's another advantage is that you can keep the cable length even shorter if you have a smaller switch located closer to your setup.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and basically, this had been our basic introduction. I would just like to mention that you can always contact us using support@genelec.com. We have a team of really experienced people in our nice Zendesk system, and we will always take care of you. And we are quite fast, so usually you don't have to wait longer than 1 to 2 days for us to reply. And of course, you can find all the needed information on genelec.com/smart-IP. So if you have any additional questions, of course, please feel free to contact us under support@genelec.com. And as said before, also, if you have any suggestions, so what would you like to see in this series, or what would you like to have as additional options in the future? Even if you have an idea for additional, for example, mounting options, always just get in contact with us and share this. And of course, also use our LinkedIn group or our Facebook groups to discuss this stuff. And yeah. And then I think, thanks again for being with us. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Fredrik, for being with us. And
thank you.
Have a nice day. See you soon.
Yeah. Have a nice day. Bye.